What's going on, guys? Kalen here. It's been a minute since I've dropped a video essay. I want to return to that. Today's topic is going to be on why mass shooters kill. The recent events regarding Donald Trump, the attempted assassination, bring to mind a deeper, darker part of culture, particularly Western culture, that I've found is not often explored. When we talk about the shooter, where he came from, what his background was, providing that this was not an inside job, we would have to look at why the shooter actually did the things that he did. And so in this video essay, I'm going to talk about the mentality, the mindset, reasonings for why mass shooters do what they do, the calculation methodologies, and we're also going to talk about some solutions to lessen, if not altogether stop, mass shooting violence. Let's go ahead and jump in. An exploration into why mass shooters kill. Mass shooters typically kill alone. This should tell us something. Methodologies and shooters. Mass shootings are nothing new. We know that statistically speaking, young males account for more than 80% of mass shootings and killings in the US. We know that in most of these cases, the perpetrators are typically mentally deranged, albeit intelligent, loners with fringe worldviews. It is also true that between the 1966 University of Texas Tower shooting and the 1999 shooting at Columbine High School in Colorado, where Dylan Klebold and Eric Harris slaughtered 12 of their fellow students and one teacher, mass killings have received increased publicity. What we haven't been able to accurately assess is what constitutes a mass killing and why. In an unrivaled age of law and order, mass killings continue to happen. To be sure, the history of humanity is rich with murder. In no way will this piece attempt to explain why. The motivation for homicidal human behavior is beyond the scope of this essay. Additionally, the reason or reasons humans murder innocent people, especially the young, old, and defenseless, are typically multivariate and require in-depth, nuanced analysis, some of which will be provided here. In this vein, two clear points will set the tone for the following essay. The first is that violence, motivated by a spirit of rebellion, appears to be part and parcel of and inseparable from the European political legacy and, by extension, the American psyche. The second is that if human beings are unable to divorce their desire for rebellion from violent methods of achieving it, they, as well as their children, will come to suffer heinously and brutally the results of their own bloodlust. If it isn't an innate spirit of rebellion, then perhaps there is another unidentified ideology that compels Westerners to, in the face of real or imagined opposition, use mass violence to advance their own goals. I say this because nowhere else in the world are school shootings, public massacres, and mass indiscriminate killings and assassination attempts as prevalent than in the US and other westernized nations. And before you say that heinous acts of violence occur everywhere on our planet, and especially in places like Africa and the Middle East, I would caution you to consider that America and Western nations pride themselves on the rule of law and on the right to a safe and autonomous existence where one is allowed to freely pursue happiness. The rule of law in some modern-day Middle Eastern and African nations does not compare in sustainability, effectiveness, or complexity to what Western countries possess. This is not to say that these countries and others like them are completely lawless. And to the extent that they are, external interference and political infringement over the years has been a prominent and reoccurring factor. Afghanistan has seen centuries of bloodshed, violence, and instability due to interference from Britain and Russia, and most recently, the US. However, it is to say that more than half of the world's criminal justice systems are not defined by the English common law tradition, which boasts a rich history of criminal litigation and subsequent established legal precedent. The American legal system, largely constructed upon the core elements of British common law, is characterized by adherence to a constitution that prioritizes due process. The idea, for instance, that someone could be presumed innocent until proven guilty is a uniquely novel hallmark of Western culture and shouldn't be taken for granted. So if the Western nations developed upon foundational principles of law and order, why is it that grotesque and devastating eruptions of violence occur at random and with regularity in these countries? To answer this question, we need to understand what kinds of crimes are being committed, speak to their severity, determine who's committing them, and lastly, identify the physical and mental circumstances under which these crimes are being committed. Additionally, we will attempt to give credible explanations as to why mass killings happen and to illuminate the thought processes of those who perpetrate them. Let's start with the methodological differences in how mass shootings are accounted for in the US. Differences in methodology. It is common knowledge that there is no one way to define mass shootings. However, most definitions articulate that at least 4 people need to be killed and that all victims must be killed within a certain time frame, usually 24 hours, in order for a massacre to be considered a mass shooting. The Rockefeller Institute of Government's website has this to say about mass public shootings. Quote, A mass shooting is an incident of targeted violence carried out by one or more shooters at one or more public or populated locations. Multiple victims, both injuries and fatalities, are associated with the attack, and both the victims and locations are chosen either at random or for their symbolic value. The event occurs within a single 24-hour period, though most attacks typically last only a few minutes. The motivation of the shooting must not correlate with gang violence or terroristic activity." End quote. Many other think tanks and research groups offer similar factors to define mass shootings. Using these parameters, the Rockefeller Institute concluded that between 1966 and 2022, 441 mass shooting events occurred in the US. These have resulted in 1,569 deaths and 3,923 victims injured and killed. The Washington Post has created an online mass shooter tracker which tracks and categorizes mass shootings in the US. It is updated each time a mass killing with a gun occurs. The Post, in partial alignment with the Rockefeller Institute's calculation methodology, also excludes gang-related homicides, domestic killings, and terrorist killings sponsored by terrorist organizations. Yet, according to their stats, 461 mass killings have occurred since just 2006. This obviously does not take into account killings that have happened prior to 2006. Without diving into each case and what the Post criteria were for defining a mass shooting, there's no way to know exactly how the Post's mass shooter tracker has managed to calculate a higher percentage of mass shootings than the Rockefeller Institute's and in a shorter period of time. However, the Post indicates that they include in a shooter's victim tally those they stab. As well, in a departure from traditional victim count methodology, the Post has decided to include domestic murders back into the mass shooting qualifications category. Now, while this essay is neither a pro nor anti-gun piece, it can be enlightening and beneficial to understand the larger picture around general gun violence in Western countries. The degree to which we perceive mass shootings to be a major problem or not depends on what factors we use to define mass shootings and how, in general, we look at the issue of gun violence. Some organizations define a mass shooting in terms of the total number of people shot, killed or not, while some only consider an event to be a mass shooting if 4 or more people are killed. Understanding these differences in calculation methods would help us understand why, for instance, the 1998 shooting at Thurston High School in Springfield, Oregon, in which a 15-year-old perpetrator killed 2 students and wounded 25 others, is excluded from a number of existing mass shooting databases. To this end, I'd like to draw your attention to the 8-year period between 2014 and 2022, in which the Journal of American Medical Association, JAMA, took a broader approach in defining mass shootings. They concluded that in just that 8-year span, 4,011 mass shootings had occurred. This means, according to JAMA's calculations, 10 times the amount of mass killings than what the Rockefeller Institute reported had occurred in just 8 years. How is it possible that one reputable organization calculated 10 times the amount of mass shootings in an 8-year period than did another reputable organization in a 56-year period? Again, the answer lies in how mass shootings are calculated. For JAMA, gang-related gun deaths, domestic gun violence, and gun violence perpetrated by a terrorist organization were all counted as mass shootings. This is all to say that there could easily be more or less mass shootings occurring, and we wouldn't necessarily be aware of it. This is because what constitutes a mass shooting depends on the calculation methodology used by the organization conducting the research. As well, media outlets and research organizations tend to report on the most sensationalized events. Sadly, events that have low to no death toll simply aren't given high priority. The shooters. While hundreds to potentially thousands of mass shootings and killings have been recorded in this country since the 1966 University of Texas tower shooting, 7 stand out as particularly telling of what factors we should be focusing on in order to understand what goes into the psychology of mass shooters. These are the incidents involving Anders Breivik, Brenton Tarrant, Nicholas Cruz, Peyton Gendron, Aaron Alexis, Xavier Johnson, and Christopher Dorner. Each of these cases speaks to differences in motive, cultural background, and ideology. Anders Breivik could be considered the godfather of the modern mass shooting phenomenon. Many of the shooters that followed in subsequent years referenced his extremist philosophy, style, and approach. Breivik was a far right-wing neo-Nazi terrorist who on July 22, 2011, killed a total of 77 people in an Oslo, Norway bombing and a mass shooting on the island of Utøya, Norway. The mass shooting victims, 69 in total, were mainly teenagers and very young adults. As a youth, Breivik was arrested for spraying graffiti on a wall. Around 20 years of age, he's said to have joined a group called the Anti-Immigration Progress Party in 2002. In 2005, he joined a gun club. He left the Anti-Immigration Progress Party in 2006, and he maxed out 9 credit cards to gain the 130 pounds needed to orchestrate and carry out his attacks 3 to 4 years later. Breivik believed that Europe was under threat by foreigners who were destroying European culture. He was vehemently opposed to liberal expansionist or multiculturalist policies in all other non-white ethnicities. Breivik's upbringing was turbulent and fraught with dysfunction and instability. He had several maternal and paternal half-brothers and half-sisters. Breivik had grossly inadequate, if any, cohesion in his family structure. His parents divorced when he was 12. In and out of foster care and no stranger to psychiatric evaluations, his medical files told the story of an abused child. As was mentioned, his attacks were used as the impetus for future attacks by similar-minded individuals. On February 14, 2018, 19-year-old Floridian Nicholas Cruz, using a Smith & Wesson M&P-15, a semi-automatic assault-style rifle, entered Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High, his former high school, and proceeded to mercilessly gun down students and staff. In all, he killed 17 people. When interviewed and asked by his assigned court psychiatrist how he went about the attack and what was going through his mind as he gunned innocent people down, he relayed the details with the eerie calm of a hardened special ops soldier, casually debriefing with his team after a firefight.
She was on the stairway?
Yeah, I shot her. She was crawling. I shot her in the back.
Okay, and how come?
I told you I wanted to kill as many people as I could.
The state landing blow after blow on that defense diagnosis in its rebuttal case today.
Say if someone thinks about killing people for over 6 months, if not longer, is that an impulsive act? Or is that likely a more planned act or more premeditated act?
Did my own research.
Yeah, tell me what research you did.
I looked up on Wikipedia. I studied mass murderers and how they did it. Like their plans and what they got and what they used.
Who an expert witness who told jurors in evaluating the Parkland shooter.
Why are you wearing your JRTC polo shirt?
To disguise myself if I do go in.
His own words and actions before the shooting.
My name is Nick, and I'm going to be the next school shooter of 2018.
Here's the plan. I'm going to go take an Uber.
With the power of my AR, you will all know who I am.
During and after the shooting.
Calmly purchase a drink.
Showed the research, planning.
Describe to me what happened.
His head blew up like a water balloon.
And lack of remorse.
How come you stopped at that moment?
I couldn't find anyone to kill.
That Dr. Charles Scott told jurors underpinned his diagnosis of antisocial personality disorder.
Brenton Tarrant, in 2019, killed 51 people and was charged with the attempted murder of 40 others when he attacked 2 mosques in Christchurch, New Zealand. His motive was the same as Anders Breivik's. He believed in the Great White Replacement theory, whereby non-white peoples, particularly those from Muslim-majority countries, are said to be replacing white Europeans through immigration. On May 14, 2022, Peyton Gendron, a professed American neo-Nazi, anti-Semitic, eco-fascist, ethno-nationalist, populist, and white supremacist, donned a suit of body armor, a part of which included a military-grade helmet and a head-mounted camera for streaming purposes, and loaded up his car with a Bushmaster XM15, which is an AR-15 style rifle, an Axis XP hunting rifle, and a Mossberg 500 shotgun. He drove 3 hours away from his home in Conklin, New York, to Top Supermarket, a grocery store located in a predominantly black neighborhood in Buffalo, New York, pulled into the parking lot, exited his vehicle, and began ruthlessly gunning down innocent civilians. He shot 4 people, killing 3 of them outside of the store, and then proceeded to enter the supermarket. Once inside, he shot 8 more people and killed 6 of them. Included in his death count was the on-site security guard, a retired police officer himself. In all, Gendron killed 10. After receiving 11 life sentences without the possibility of parole, he read what appeared to be a statement of remorse.
After the victims' families had their say, the convicted killer made a statement and offered an apology.
I'm very sorry for stealing the lives of your loved ones. I cannot express how much I regret all the decisions I made leading up to my actions on May 14th. I did a terrible thing that day. I shot and killed people because they were black. Looking back now, I can't believe I actually did it.
Some of those who lost.
Prior to his crime, he was reported to have been a supporter of the authoritarian left. After visiting 4chan, a forum for extremist thought, particularly of the right-wing persuasion, and a breeding ground for racist, sexist, and homophobic ideology, he became increasingly anti-left and far-right-wing. He also wrote in his manifesto that he was lonely, depressed, and by his own admittance, should have gone out more instead of spending so much time watching YouTube by himself. Aaron Alexis, a black New York native and former Navy electrician's mate, 3rd class, stationed in Fort Worth, Texas, complained of mental health problems, heard voices in his head, and suffered post-traumatic stress after helping victims during the September 11th attacks. Alexis believed that he'd been subjected to extremely low-frequency electromagnetic waves and that they had driven him to commit the massacre he would soon commence. He'd been known to be a troublemaker while in the military, but was never seriously reprimanded for his actions. Additionally, he'd been arrested on multiple occasions for gun-related public disturbances but was never charged with any crimes. Fast forward to September 16, 2013, when after purchasing a Remington 870 pump-action shotgun, he entered Building 197 on the Washington Navy Yard in Washington, D.C., and proceeded to blast out of existence 12 people before he was shot dead by law enforcement officers. His rampage lasted 2 hours. Alexis was prescribed an antidepressant medicine for insomnia called trazodone on August 28, 2013, or about 19 days before his attack. Its more serious known side effects include suicide, mania, irregular heartbeat, and pathologically prolonged erections. It is possible that Alexis may have had trazodone in his system during his rampage. No official motive has been assigned for this unfortunate case. However, we can deduce a few reasons. Friends of Alexis said that he became disgruntled after he was not paid fairly for government contracting work that he'd done. He also felt that he was racially oppressed. Though not all, many mass shooters can be characterized by the same general elements. An angry person, typically male, is upset at a perceived wrong or an injustice in society. Many times he feels he has in some way been harmed. He normally comes from a dysfunctional familial setting and has experienced physical, sexual, or psychological abuse. As a result, they spend much of their time alone. Sometimes, in addition to the above variables, the perpetrator hasn't achieved well scholastically, not necessarily a causal variable, but potentially a correlated one. As in the case of Micah Xavier Johnson, the former military member who ambushed police officers and killed 5 of them before being blown up by a law enforcement explosive device. These men are often socially maladjusted loners who have anxiety, depression, and mania. They also have had some military training or at the very least a fascination with weapons. They are not popular with women and find it very hard to date. Lastly, it is important to realize that in just about every case, the individual is looking for a tribe, a group, and to have association with like-minded souls that positively reflect his identity. Micah Xavier Johnson, for instance, began to claim an allegiance to black liberation groups like the New Black Panther Party, and during his assault, screamed words like black liberation and black supremacy. He was also known to have liked several black nationalist political groups on Facebook. Zealot, eccentric, and boredom are words that come to mind for these men when analyzing their ideologies and approach to killing. In some instances, however, an actual wrong has likely been committed against the individual, as in the case of former LAPD officer Christopher Dorner. In such cases, the shooter may attempt to avenge himself and clear his name through the application of vigilante justice. Dorner wrote in his manifesto before going on a targeted killing spree that he had been wrongly fired by the LAPD for reporting that his partner and fellow officer, Terry Evans, had used unnecessary and violent force on a harmless person. Dorner alleged his partner had kicked a mentally challenged man suffering from dementia in the chest and in the face. After the investigation and subsequent court deliberations, it was found that Dorner had lied. However, the victim testified on record that he was kicked by Dorner's partner. Dorner was an honorably discharged military service veteran and had exemplified satisfactory performance during his police training. Much to his dismay, Dorner was fired in 2008 for making false statements after a review board found in favor of his partner. Dorner appealed to both the California Superior Court and the California Supreme Court. Both ruled against Dorner and upheld his firing. In February of 2013, Dorner began targeting and killing those he'd marked as responsible for his predicament and published an 11,000-word manifesto on Facebook. After a 12-day manhunt, Dorner enclosed himself in a cabin located in California's San Bernardino Mountains. LAPD officers surrounded Dorner and fired pyrotechnic tear gas burners into the cabin. The cabin caught fire and burned down. Dorner's charred body was found amid the rubble. The autopsy report states that even though Dorner's body was burned badly, a self-inflicted gunshot to the head had been the cause of his death. According to the LA Times, during the search for Dorner, the LAPD shot 2 women, riddling their Toyota Tacoma with more than 100 rounds. The 2 women were Emma Hernandez, 71, and her daughter, Margie Carranza, 47. When their vehicle was assaulted by a hail of rounds, they were simply delivering newspapers for the Los Angeles Times. They weren't associated with or connected to Christopher Dorner. The LAPD declined to confirm the total number of officers involved or how many bullets were fired. They also failed to confirm if any verbal warnings were given to the women before police began showering them with gun rounds. The officers claimed that the women's vehicle matched the description of a vehicle that belonged to Christopher Dorner. About half an hour after the LAPD's disgusting assault on the 2 newspaper delivery ladies, officers from LA County's Torrance Police Department, still in search of Dorner, slammed their cruiser into David Perdue's black Honda Ridgeline and began riddling his truck with rounds. Like the first shooting, the incident involved a vehicle that police claimed resembled Dorner's truck. Perdue was not hit by any of the bullets, but reportedly sustained injuries from the officers' aggressive actions. In both of these cases, the LAPD settled with the victims for amounts in the millions. It appears that Dorner may have been justified in his assertion that the LAPD were a racist, crooked, and corrupt police department. This, however, does not excuse the way he sought retaliation for the wrongs he alleged the department committed against him. We should note that although he is classified as a mass shooter, his motives differ from most other shooters significantly. Enough, I think, to warrant separate classification. Part 2. Why mass shooters kill, perspectives, and what can be done. Jordan Peterson, the renowned clinical psychologist, has spoken publicly about the necessity and capacity of humans to learn from stories. Good stories, he feels, are infused with the requisite lessons for human development of character and right orientation in the world. There may be some experiential wisdom in this idea. It can be luminously beneficial to analyze our lives from the perspective of narrative, as in, what stories are being told, what stories are we telling ourselves, and what stories are we telling each other. Well-crafted fictional narratives can help us determine what we believe about the world, and this in turn can help us decide how we wish to orient ourselves. Stranger Than Fiction. Fyodor Dostoevsky's Crime and Punishment, a novel published by the extremely adept Russian writer sometime in 1866, spans more than 400 pages and is a work that requires considerable time to digest. The reward one receives after completing it manifests as a continuous elevation in thought around what is required to transform one's life for the good. This work could be considered a technology for self-improvement, as I found that it yields immense wisdom if considered thoroughly. The story centers around Dostoevsky's main character, Raskolnikov, a young, sullen, manic, depressive ex-university student, brilliant in mind, but angry and entitled in spirit. Raskolnikov, in a moment of bitter agitation and lesser clarity, decides to murder, by axe, two women, one an old, haggard pawnbroker, the other her beautiful but doting younger sister. Raskolnikov, for our purposes here, should be likened to mass shooters and murderers of today. Although the reason is never explicitly stated, it is clear that Raskolnikov views the pawnbroker as a representation of capitalist greed, oppression of the poor, and an ethnic threat to his potentially messianic view of Russia. Dostoevsky is reported by some to be noticeably anti-Semitic. The broker's sister is simply killed as a result of being in the wrong place at the wrong time. She witnesses his crime. Even as Raskolnikov has nothing against her, he murders her during his momentary frenzy, panic, and rage. Upon executing the two women, Raskolnikov is at once quickened to the severity of his actions and falls into a hysterical delirium characterized by waves of fever and intense bouts of sickness. He's plagued by unbearable emotion as he struggles to cope with guilt, anxiety, fear, rage, and the ultimate social question of what is worth morally valuable. Near the end of the book, Raskolnikov turns himself in and we are given the results of his trial. While he confesses and is found guilty of the murders, he is ruled to have been temporarily insane in the course of their commission. Additionally, several character witnesses testified to his generally charitable nature, and in light of his many good works, he's said to have rescued children from a burning house and was known to regularly give his last rubles to those in need. He's given a sentence of only 8 years hard labor at a penal colony. Incidentally, while in prison, he finds within himself the capacity to love fully and graciously on the final pages of the work. There are an infinite many angles one can analyze this classic from. Through a masterful display of third-person omniscience, Dostoevsky supplies his audience with much fodder for philosophical debate. He layers his story with characters who challenge Raskolnikov's thinking around murder, entitlement, success, money, fame, and society. Indeed, an entire chapter book could be written on the abundant literary themes found within. Disaffected men, anti-hero, or social deviants. I'd like to focus on Raskolnikov's universality as a disgruntled citizen of a lower social status in a society experiencing political and economic flux. During the period the book was written, circa 1860s, Russian state and economic policy were in major transition under the newly appointed Tsar Alexander II. Succeeding his reactionary iron-fisted father, Alexander I, Alexander II liberalizes Russia with a series of measures that install new judicial laws, political reforms, and provide new opportunities to Russian citizenry. The most notorious of these measures is the emancipation of the serfs from their positions as servants of the Russian aristocracy. This social milieu provides a relatable atmosphere to modern times as many Americans live under extremely impoverished circumstances. Although the country as a whole is thought to be wealthy, a great many American citizens live below the country's poverty line and struggle exceedingly in positions of unwanted, demoralizing servitude for their survival. Kurt Vonnegut wrote about the state of American socioeconomics when he explained, quote, "America is the wealthiest nation on earth, but its people are mainly poor and poor Americans are urged to hate themselves." He continues, It is in fact a crime for an American to be poor, even though America is a nation of poor. Every other nation has folk traditions of men who were poor but extremely wise and virtuous, and therefore more estimable than anyone with power and gold. No such tales are told by the American poor. They mock themselves and glorify their betters." End quote. Raskolnikov is poor and semi-educated, yet highly intelligent and anxious to achieve. He is also proud, to a fault, and judgmental of those he deems to be intellectually inferior. This is evidenced by his strenuous disregard for losing, the wealthy lawyer temporarily engaged to his sister, who nonetheless extracts from the common liberal philosophies of the day his own vapid, watered-down version of complex social phenomena in politics. Raskolnikov is forced, however, to acknowledge through his encounters with Luzin the necessity of providing for oneself and that he is not in a very good position to do so in spite of all his intellectual prowess. This realization frustrates Raskolnikov to no end, and ultimately leads him to kill the pawnbroker, the representation of unjust acquisition and affluence he hasn't achieved. Raskolnikov is also the pedantic altruist burdened with a tremulous fervor for helping others. When his impoverished mother gives him money, he frequently gives it away, once even giving it to a widow to cover the funeral expenses of her late husband. He also offers fair money to a police officer on behalf of a woman he perceives to be a drunken victim of rape in order to ensure her safe return home. How does a society square the dichotomy of one who both murders and is also philanthropic and charitable? Are we to praise for their good works those who inflict vile flagrancies upon society? Or are we to ignore their social contributions and exile them into social oblivion, perhaps even invoking upon them capital punishment? Educational disregard and the psychology of disgruntled men. Today, we witness the rise of socially disaffected male youth. These young men are members, many by their own admission, of the MGTOW, men going their own way, or incel, involuntary celibate, communities. These men describe themselves quite intelligently as being disillusioned with modern society. They spend copious hours on internet forums, often aggressively harassing other users, are many times avid players of computer games that contain strong elements of fantasy violence, have little regard for formalized higher education, and possess unrefined worldviews which essentially blame governments, sometimes rightly, people of other races, and/or women for society's problems. Raskolnikov is an example of this type of disaffected youth. He loathes his position as a poor, unprivileged man. Yet, instead of attempting to elevate his station in life by studying and writing more, he is held in high regard for his intellectual acumen by various characters throughout the story. He chooses to sulk and bask in his delusions, adopting until the very end of the book a bilious attitude. He finds no motivation to achieve within the bounds of convention. Countless men today are burdened, overwhelmed by the great mass of competition and difficulty in attaining positions of security, authority, prominence, and financial success. While their desire to be better remains ever present, their drive to achieve has been somehow stifled. This is borne out by statistics that speak to a fundamental lack of post-secondary educational attainment in young men. While more men hold college degrees now than did in, say, 1940, the percentage of men compared to women obtaining college education is considerably lower now and continues to decline. While biological, cultural, and environmental differences in the way women and men are reared are likely responsible, we're still left with the blaring outcome of grossly disillusioned, inadequately prepared, practically incapable men milling about society. They are angry, and though many are intelligent, their collective potential is largely unrealized. The result is that they inflict suffering upon themselves and those around them. Dostoevsky perpetuates throughout the novel a theme of suffering with the use of peripheral characters. Katerina Ivanovna is a widow, originally born of higher social status, who through severe misfortune and desperation marries a man from a lower class. When he dies, their daughter falls into prostitution to contribute to the family's expenses. Up until her death, caused by continuous stress and drinking, Katerina declares her victimhood. She lives in perpetual sorrow, misery, and anguish, and clings to the idea that she does not deserve a life of such severe destitution since she is the child of a father from a noble family. Her character demonstrates the suffering and unpredictable nature of life. Dostoevsky reflects Raskolnikov's suffering to us by making him into a pendulum that continuously oscillates between anguish and sanity. In the moments Raskolnikov is charitable, hopeful, positively thoughtful, and redemptive, he portrays sanity. When he is destitute, devoid of energy, frantic, frenzied, capricious, and suspicious, he is in anguish, torment, and crazed. A great many of our society's young men are failing to effectively navigate this tennis match of moods. Capitalist success, entitlement, and masculinity, an overlooked reality. Like Raskolnikov, Dylan Roof, Peyton Gendron, Salvador Ramos, Adam Lanza, and the 7 shooters mentioned in the previous section were all disgruntled, intellectually misguided, self-righteous, lonely, and narcissistic youths. They were also products of a socioeconomic system which prioritizes fame, success, notoriety, and achievement while young. The issue isn't only that the latter traits are unimaginatively promoted and prized as society's preeminent ideas, but that they have become inextricably connected to one's chances at having a quality existence. In other words, if one does not attain some measure of fame, success in some field, notoriety, or achievement, one cannot hope to live a materially sufficient existence, at least not in Western societies, one that shields them from alienation, ridicule, depression, and self-loathing. In order to survive, one need not have more than a simple minimum wage job, perhaps 2, and live within one's means. However, if mere survival is not the goal, and if thriving is, then a typical minimum wage job or 2 won't suffice. Fruit-bearing connections with broader society, meaningful interpersonal relationships, and wages that pay enough to explore the many facets of one's curiosities are more apt to yield the kind of existence that people truly desire. Most of humanity lacks the latter conditions and must perform near Herculean acts of sacrifice, possess unceasing levels of motivation, and demonstrate an interminable devotion to a particular goal in order to elevate themselves to a status such that they can realize some measure of prosperity. These realities are only exacerbated by troubled and angry men who have failed to pursue, for a diverse multitude of reasons, higher education or to invest in the development of their higher faculties. It isn't that development of one's higher faculties will guarantee them the life that they wish to live, but that such an investment in one's mind is likely to give them a more desirable life than they would have gotten otherwise. In terms of material attainment, you might ask why these men don't make the decision to develop themselves. If starting a business seems daunting, they could simply take out loans to attend college, right? After all, the social and financial prospects one has after attaining a bachelor's degree increase dramatically, even in an oversaturated job market. The issue with this is that student loan debt often follows the average borrower around for the rest of their lives. Many people are discouraged from making such a bet on themselves and their earning potential in the long run. And while one's financial prospects increase with a 4-year degree, those prospects don't matter if one never finds a job that gives them the option to materialize those prospects. Alternatively, they could secure employment at a regular company and work their way to the top over a 20-year period, or perhaps even faster if they're highly motivated, right? In this last case, a college degree isn't even necessary. Yet, in many cases, men are repulsed by the prospect of such a grim and dismal trajectory on work as relates to the most productive years of their lives. They intuit this even if they can't articulate it. Men, especially those of middle class and low social status, understand all too well that there is more to life than slaving away for 2 or 3 decades in a non-professional or even professional setting. They want more for themselves. They want to contribute meaningfully, but may not have the patience to put in the time necessary and walk the path required to become what they wish. These men are very aware of a system that preaches an extreme and almost religious devotion to capitalism, such that by any means necessary, they must employ themselves in the pursuit of massive wealth attainment or struggle miserably for life's necessities and its finer luxuries. Are we to exclusively blame each individual for their disillusionment, or are we to try and understand what elements in our society cause such an aversion to our economic model of self-sufficiency? Raskolnikov bitterly criticized Luzin, his sister's fiancé, and a lawyer, for his arrogant and haughty character and his wealth. Luzin, who is positioned well materially and socially, passive-aggressively shares his pomposity with Raskolnikov's sister and mother. In an exceptional show of conceited egotism, he verbally assaults with false accusations of theft Sonia, Katerina Ivanovna's daughter, in front of Ivanovna's audience at her husband's repast. Raskolnikov sees Luzin as representative of the worst kind of bourgeois thinking which says that even if someone is not morally sound, as long as one plays by the rules of the established economic system, one can win. Raskolnikov despises the achievement of success through traditional but objectionable means. For him, one who has attained status and security by way of society's established system had not gotten it by way of true merit. If society could create the means by which one obtained their value, then what of the individual who sought to creatively manifest his own will in spite of normative culture? Dostoevsky uses Napoleon as an example of one who, instead of abiding by the dictates of society, authors a new existence for himself and society as a foremost agent of revolutionary change. It was Napoleon's boldness in waging war that made him meritorious and worthy of one's aspirations, according to Raskolnikov. In this context, young, disgruntled men can band together, become mutinous, and resort to criticizing society, individual sectors, or all of it. In online forums, disaffected men troll, which is to make fun of others, aiming racially or sexually motivated affronts, ironically, at those they never intend to meet. In online forums, disaffected men troll, which is to make fun of others, aiming racially and sexually motivated affronts, ironically, at those they never intend to meet. Through this exercise, they create for themselves the illusion of belonging, of control, of knowing and correct social orientation. Of course, this orientation only seems virtuous within the confines of deranged social circles. The vast majority of these men do not act upon their destructive impulses beyond the screen. Those who do, however, tend either to commit suicide or cause the death of others through mass shootings. Raskolnikov, if an actual human being, would have found himself squarely in the latter category, although he only killed 2 and didn't use a gun. If the rules within a community are embrace stereotypes and disrespect others, because that will give you the power and notoriety, performing these behaviors would place one upon a path of recognition by their peers. In this way, those who are disaffected from normative society can gain a satisfactory measure of social acceptance, albeit outside the overarching culture's traditional values. Pick up your cross? In his book, Beyond Order, 12 More Rules for Life, Jordan Peterson discusses the analogy of the cross and refers to it as the ultimate symbol of reckoning that ends in total transformation. According to Peterson, when one decides to bear their own cross, they come to understand the lessons of sacrifice, strength, inner, and at times outer, determination, courage in the face of adversity, and ultimately death and rebirth. Peterson might suggest, if young and experienced men and women are to grow into the positive social contributors we wish them to be, then they must willingly bear their own burdens with a mind to learn and grow from the inordinate trials they will undoubtedly face on the way to greatness. Although I'm not a fan of everything Peterson articulates, I am in agreement that pain is inexorable from life and that there is little time to indulge hedonistic reverie if one wishes to change their world for the better. To live boldly is to attack life head on and conquer when faced with uncertain odds. However, we should understand that none of the latter is possible or sustainable without a supportive community. Community support is non-negotiable in male development. As we learned with Raskolnikov, behaviors that erode the communal fabric are likely to end in torment and suffering for the perpetrator, the direct victim or victims of deviant behavior, and the larger community. While society is left to deal with the aftermath of suicide or mass murder sprees, those who commit these contemptible acts, if they live, find themselves ostracized and or imprisoned as a result of their actions. Peterson writes, quote, "Whenever you are cut off at the knees by one of life's many catastrophes, whenever a dream collapses or someone close to you is hurt in some fundamental way, especially a child or another loved one, then you can easily find yourself thinking, perhaps it would be better if the whole mess was just brought to a halt." End quote. He says all suicidal, homicidal, and genocidal actors are possessed by a desire to kill. Quote, "They have decided not only that life is unbearable and the malevolence of existence is inexcusable, but that everything should be punished for the mere sin of its being." End quote. He goes on to say, quote, "If we want to have any hope of dealing with the existence of evil and working towards its minimization, we must understand these sorts of impulses." End quote. I would add that we need to understand these sorts of impulses as a community. There simply is no social salvation without collective effort and knowledge sharing. The model of manhood in today's keep up or fail, super capitalist, individualistic social milieu encourages men to become loners and forsake community, since success is a function of individual effort. Instead, manhood must be premised on the concept of strength through unity. Teamwork is what allows people with a desire to change the world to impact the community. Always. It must be realized by now that the majority of mass shooters kill alone. Understanding this should lead us to conclude that these men are in serious need of strong, consistent community. Whether for evil or for good, one must possess group support to significantly affect the world around them. With enough support from positive groups, aiming upward, as Peterson might articulate, men can find themselves and help foster the development of a new society built around protection and human growth. For men who desire admiration and favor from, and to have a positive impact on society, self-work with society's blessings and aid of the most uncomfortable sort is required. This suggestion is not a popular one. By society's blessings and aid, I refer to community support of a brand that empowers humans to achieve much more than they ever could on their own. Historically, governments have been the foremost authors of death and destruction, slaughtering and persecuting millions of people to maintain official legitimacy. Today, not much has changed. Given a situation that calls for the genocide or subversion of a person, class, or group, governments will take up the cause in the name of maintaining peace and order and furthering their own ends. One might ask how self-development and individualism common ideas, although nevertheless used to support neoliberal philosophy, could deliver men from the seemingly insuperable depths of darkness. The answer is that to become the kind of person able to initiate and sustain a long-term fight for genuine and positive change, one must develop the characteristics of strength and resilience in the face of adversity and gruesome discomfort. To build unity and inspire change, these two qualities must be in abundance. Again, this realization is unsettling, yet it is sure to manifest better outcomes for the individual and, by extension, for societies that struggle with rearing young men. Humans have to remember that the grueling but rewarding work of providing value to others, of authentically servicing your own tribe while you battle your own psychic inconsistencies and work to sort out your value system, is among the most exhaustively rigorous but most necessary. Finland, the future of gun safety. One example of community support that might be studied for its ability to lessen the possibility of unwanted gun violence and foster self-improvement and personal development is Finland's new proposal to increase the number of gun ranges it currently has from around 700 to 1,000 by 2030. The measure comes as a response to the Russian invasion of Ukraine. Finland shares a border of 830 miles with Russia and has decided, as a hedge against Russian aggression, to increase its country's defense and security capacities. For advocates of gun control, increasing the amount of gun ranges and improving the average gun owner's lethality with a firearm may seem like a dangerous and counterintuitive measure, considering the mass shootings that have occurred in Europe and the US over the past 30 years. They have a point. However, taken as a preventative measure that has the dual benefit of mass gun education and the development of community cohesion, this maneuver could serve as a model for countries like the US who seem to struggle with mass shootings caused by lonely, deranged men. Either way, this action should be studied as a potential way to deter further gun violence and develop strong, supportive, and positively oriented communities within sectors of the population that commit crime due to isolation. Likewise, everyone must understand that the solution to pain and turmoil is never found in the destruction of other people groups, even if they are perceived to be the direct cause for suffering. One possessing power is best persuaded through direct, sustained, peaceful, and transformative reasoning for a period if they are to change course. You must get them to agree with you. If not, then blood will run, figuratively or literally. One seen as the cause of our suffering, if it is not first ourselves, must be courted and spoken with to find a trade-off that satisfies both sides. If you perceive a problem with another group of people, find and speak with them to discover their perspective before you pass judgment. Understand that they may have an altogether opposite worldview. In such cases, patience and wisdom are required to discover a pathway towards peaceful coexistence. This does not mean we should cower and express weakness in hopes of gaining the favor of those who have their boots in our neck. It only means to seek peaceful exchange as a matter of first principles. Of course, these latter ideas are only applicable to those who wish to see human life preserved and abundant. If one is of the mindset that a few eggs have to be cracked to make an omelet, then the previous ideas will appear useless. This applies to those oppressed and those who oppress. Final thoughts. Crime and Punishment sees Raskolnikov, a rascal, suffer greatly through his own delusion to begin the process of something like love for self and humanity in the final pages of the book. We aren't made aware of what happens to him after he begins his transformation, the catalyst of which is the love of Sonia, the intelligent yet unassuming former prostitute. Sonia follows Raskolnikov to prison to be his caretaker and renounces her former life, indicating that she too has decided to bear her own cross. However, we can be certain that while Raskolnikov does not feel remorse in a traditional sense for his crime, through his expiation, he learns to operate his life on the higher universal principle of love. This is something we must all aim to do. We won't always succeed in the short term, but then again, the game of life is long and mastered only after continuous failure. In many cases, those who commit heinous acts are one conversation, one outing with a positive friend group, one intervention away from turning over a new life. Lastly, we all are vulnerable to the whims of our darker sides when left alone for too long, and none of us can contend with the shadow once it has completely destroyed our ability to demonstrate love toward our fellow men. Thanks guys for listening. This has been really fun. I enjoy doing these. Please be sure to share, like, subscribe, and I will see you guys next time. Peace.